My name is Dana Sisko, and I'm 34 years old, and I have spent most of those years being the quietest person at every family dinner and the only one who ever picked up the check. Last Saturday morning, before my coffee had even finished brewing, my sister texted me, "Wire me $7,200 for my daughter's sweet 16. Under it came the photos: a rented ballroom with string lights, a floor-length dress on a hanger, and a $700 cake shaped like a stack of designer boxes. I stared at my phone like it owed me an explanation, but the text wasn't the part that broke me. What my dad said 10 minutes later was, and what I did that night, quietly, by 7:30 the next morning, none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the quietest woman at the table is usually the one holding the receipts. If a family that only calls when they need money sounds a little too familiar, do me a favor, drop a comment and hit subscribe. Because this one starts with a cake and ends with a ledger, and I need you to see every number. I read the message 3 times, and each time I read it the same way I read everything. From the bottom up, looking for the total. That's the thing about being an auditor. Other people see a party, I see a number that has to come from somewhere, and I always know exactly whose account it's coming from. My sister Tammy had sent the whole thing to the family group chat, not to me privately, which was its own kind of message. The venue photo had a caption, "Mia deserves this." Then the dress. Then the cake. With a little heart emoji, like the heart made the $700 softer. My mother replied within a minute, 3 clapping hands and gorgeous. My Aunt Denise sent a row of hearts. Nobody asked how it would be paid for, because in my family that question has always had the same answer, and the answer has always been me. I set the phone face down on the counter and let the coffee finish. I told myself to breathe, to not do the thing I always do, which is start solving before I've even decided whether it's mine to solve. Because here's what the group chat didn't say out loud. This wasn't the first time a photo had shown up before a bill. It wasn't the 10th. Tammy doesn't send prices. She sends pictures and lets the pictures do the asking, and by the time anyone talks about money, the deposit's already been paid, and the only question left is who's covering the rest. I pick the phone back up. $7,200 for a party, for a 16-year-old. And somewhere under my ribs, a decade of quiet math started adding itself up, whether I wanted it to or not. You have to understand how a thing like this gets built, because nobody hands you a bill for 10 years all at once. It comes just this once, at a time. The first one I remember was Tammy's transmission, when Mia was 6 and the car died in a grocery store lot in February. $900. Just this once. Then it was a security deposit when she moved. Then a phone bill she swore she'd pay back by the 15th. Then a credit card that had somehow climbed past $4,000 while she wasn't looking. Each one arrived the same way, urgent, small enough to feel petty to refuse, wrapped in the sentence, "You're the only one I can ask." And I was. I always was. I'd move the money before I let myself feel the pull of it leaving, because feeling it would have meant admitting there was a pattern, and admitting there was a pattern would have meant I'd have to do something about it. So I didn't count. That was my whole strategy, if you can call it that. I kept the receipts in a folder I never opened, the way you keep a smoke detector you assume is working. Somewhere in those years I'd started putting things in my own name too. A layaway here, a hold there. Just so you don't lose the spot, Dana, you'll get it back. I never got it back. But I never asked for it either, and that silence was mine, not hers. I was the fixer. Being the fixer felt like being loved, and I had never once let myself wonder what would happen to me, to what I was worth in that house, if I ever stopped fixing. People assume I paid because I had it, and that's the easy answer, so let them. But it isn't the true one. The true one is smaller and worse. I paid because when I paid, I mattered. I grew up the older sister in a house where money was always tight and love was always loud. And somewhere along the way, I learned that the surest way to be needed was to be useful. Tammy was the one people worried about. I was the one people relied on. Those are not the same thing, And the second one is lonelier than it looks. When you're the reliable one, nobody checks on you. They just check whether you're available. So I made myself available. I paid the deposits, and I fronted the holds, and I kept the folder closed, because as long as I was the one holding everything up, I never had to find out whether they'd still want me around if I put it down. That was the deal I'd made without ever saying it out loud. And here is the thing I've learned the hard way. The sentence I'd carve into the folder if I ever opened it. Love that keeps a balance isn't love, but love that never checks the balance isn't safe. I'd spent a decade so afraid of the first half that I never once looked at the second. I told myself checking would be cold. Counting would be cruel. Real families don't audit each other. And a family that had raised me to believe exactly that was about to send me a bill for $7,200 and call it a birthday. The timing is what nobody in my family knew, because I hadn't told them, because telling them would have felt like bragging, and in my family, you don't get to be proud out loud unless it's about someone else. 2 weeks earlier, I'd finally started the paperwork on a condo. Not a big one. A 2-bedroom on the east side of Columbus with a leak under the kitchen sink and a view of a parking lot. And to me, it was a cathedral. I'd been renting since I was 22. I'd been saving for the down payment since I was 26. In a separate account I didn't touch. The one account in my life with a lock on it. My loan officer had been very clear. Keep the reserves where they are. Don't take on new debt. Don't move large sums around before closing. In other words, don't do the exact thing my family had trained me to do on command. To them, I was the sister with the good job who was doing fine. Fine was a costume I'd worn so long they thought it was my skin. They didn't see the spreadsheet where every dollar had a name and a job. They didn't know that $7,200 wasn't a favor I could absorb. It was the difference between signing in March and starting over. It would come straight out of the one account that was supposed to be the first thing in my whole life that was only mine. And that, I think, is the part that finally turned the key. Not the cake. Not even the number. The fact that they were reaching, without knowing it, for the exact drawer I'd spent 8 years learning to keep shut. So I called Tammy, and I kept my voice easy, because I've learned that the calmer I sound, the more room people give themselves to say the true thing. I asked her, just curious, what the real budget was. Not to argue. I said that twice, just to see the whole picture. There was a pause, the kind she does when she's deciding how much of a thing to hand you. Why does it matter? She said. Family takes care of family, Dana. That's just what we do. And there it was. The whole religion of my house in one sentence, delivered so gently it almost sounded like wisdom. Family takes care of family. It never means all of us take care of all of us. It means the ones who can, carry the ones who won't. And everyone calls it love, so nobody has to call it what it is. I asked again, softer. How much is the venue? How much is the dress? What's already been put down? Tammy sighed like I was the difficult one. You already handled the venue deposit, remember? Back in the fall. So really it's not even that much more. I sat very still. I did remember, sort of, the way you remember a dream that turns out to have been real. A quick favor in October. A card number read out over the phone so Mia wouldn't lose the date. You'll pay it back, she'd said. And I'd said sure. And then I'd closed the folder like I always do. I'd forgotten it the way you forget a splinter until you press on it. Now she was pressing on it. And I realized I had no idea. None. How many other things in this family had my name quietly attached to the bottom line? I got off the phone and sat with October. It came back slowly, the way these things do once you stop refusing them. Tammy had called on a Tuesday, breathless, saying the ballroom she wanted for Mia's 16th was about to go to someone else, that the manager needed a card to hold the date or it was gone. She didn't have a card that would clear. Mom's was maxed. Dad's was a joke. And I was the one they called, because I'm always the one they call. And I'd read my number off the back of my own card in the middle of a workday, because the alternative was being the reason my niece didn't get her party. It hadn't felt like a decision. It had felt like reflexes. That's how they get you. Not with a con, but with a moment so small and so urgent that saying no would make you the villain of a story you didn't even know you were in. I hadn't asked what the deposit was. I found out now, scrolling back through statements with a cold, professional dread I usually reserve for other people's books. $1,500. On my card. Under my name. For a room I would never dance in. And if a $1,500 hold had slipped past me because it wore the costume of a favor, then what else had? How many holds? How many deposits? How many little strings tied to the bottom of my accounts while I kept my folder shut and my mouth shut and told myself that not looking was the same thing as generosity? I opened my laptop. I did not open the folder. Not yet. But I looked at it, sitting there on the shelf, for the first time in years. Before you decide my father is a simple man, let me tell you the thing I saw 2 Christmases ago, because it changed how I hear his voice even now. I'd gone into the den to find a phone charger and I found him instead, at the little desk under the window, with his reading glasses down his nose and a credit card statement in his hand that wasn't his. It was Tammy's. He was writing a check against it, from the pension account that was supposed to last him and Mom the rest of their lives, and he did it the way a man pays a ransom. Quickly, quietly, hoping nobody walks in. He looked up and saw me, and neither of us said a word. He just slid the statement under a magazine, and I backed out, and we have never once spoken about it. My father, who preaches that family takes care of family, has been drowning in the same water he keeps pushing the rest of us into. He wasn't the author of the rule. He was its oldest and most faithful servant. He'd been raised in a house even poorer than the one he raised us in, where the only way anyone said I love you was by handing over money they couldn't spare, and he'd carried that language into every year of his life like it was the only one he spoke. He is not cruel. He is afraid. He believes, all the way down, that the day the checks stop is the day his children stop coming home. And knowing that made what he said to me 10 minutes after the cake text land even harder, because it came from a man who was already sinking, reaching for me to hold him up. That Saturday afternoon, I decided that this time would be different, and I want to be honest about how small that decision felt. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a woman at a kitchen counter telling herself, for maybe the 40th time, that she was finally going to ask the hard question out loud. I'd made this decision before. I'd made it after the transmission and after the security deposit and after the phone bill, and every single time the family had found the exact soft spot under my ribs and pressed until I moved the money. But something about the cake, about the word wire, about the flat expectation of it, like I was a service, not a sister, had shifted something. I opened the group chat. I started typing. I didn't type no, because I'd learned no just starts a fight you lose slowly. I typed a question instead. I asked to see the full budget, itemized, before anyone talked about who was paying what. Reasonable. The kind of thing I'd say to a client. The kind of thing any adult should be able to say to another adult without the ground opening up. And then I sat there with my thumb hovering over the little blue arrow, and I felt the whole architecture of my life lean against that button. Send it and I stop being the reliable one. Send it and I find out, at last, whether they love me or just my availability. My thumb hung there for a long time. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. My coffee went cold. And then I pressed it, and the message went out to all of them at once, and I set the phone down and waited for the house I grew up in to answer. For about 4 minutes, nothing happened, and those 4 minutes were the longest quiet my family has ever given me. Then the typing bubbles started, and stopped, and started again. 3 people composing at once, which in a group chat is the equivalent of a room going still. My Aunt Denise got there first. Since when do we make each other fill out forms, Dana? Then my cousin, who I hadn't heard from since he needed a cosigner. Wow, it's your niece. Then Mom, the peacemaker, threading the needle the way she always does. I'm sure Dana didn't mean it like that. But I had meant it like that. That was the whole problem. I'd asked one normal question, and the family had reacted like I'd stood up at a funeral and demanded to see the will. Nobody answered the question, you'll notice. Nobody sent a budget. In my family, a request for a number is never met with a number. It's met with a feeling, aimed directly at your conscience, because the entire system depends on you never actually being allowed to look at the math. Family helps family. Don't make it weird. It's your niece. Each message was another hand on my back, guiding me gently toward my checkbook. And every one of them believed, sincerely, that they were the ones being reasonable, and I was the one being cold. That's what I finally understood, watching those bubbles bloom. They weren't lying to me. They'd been raised on the same rule I had, and to them, I wasn't asking a fair question. I was breaking a sacred one. I put the phone in a drawer, went for a walk I don't remember taking, and came back to 11 new messages and one from a number that made my stomach drop. The venue. I'll get to the venue's message in a minute, because first Tammy escalated and I need you to see how she did it, since it's the most honest thing about her. She didn't argue budgets. She went straight for the softest target in the room. A photo landed in the chat. Mia, standing in a fitting room mirror in that floor-length dress, one hand on her hip, trying to look happy for the camera and not quite managing it. Under it, guess I'll tell her the party's off because her aunt wants a spreadsheet. She'll understand. She'll understand. A phrase designed to make me the woman who made a 16-year-old cry. And it worked the way it always works. My chest went tight. My thumb went reaching. And for one full second, I was ready to send the money just to make the picture stop existing. That's the machinery of it. Tammy doesn't come at you with anger. She comes at you with a child, because a child is the one thing I have never in my life been able to say no to, and she knows it. And she has always known it. But somewhere in that tight-chested second, the auditor in me did what she's trained to do, which is refuse to sign anything just because someone's rushing me. I looked at the picture again. Not at the dress, at Mia's face. And Mia, my smart, watchful niece, did not look like a girl afraid of losing a party. She looked like a girl afraid of what the party was doing to the grown-ups around her. That was the first crack in the story I'd been told. And it was the moment I stopped asking whether I could afford the party and started asking who this party was actually for. I drove out to Millridge the next morning to see my mother, because I thought if anyone would stand with me, it was her. And I want you to understand, I really believed that, right up until the moment I found out otherwise. Millridge is about 40 minutes from my apartment, a small town with one good diner and a lot of empty storefronts, the kind of place where everybody knows whose kids turned out fine. My parents still live in the house I grew up in. I let myself in, and Mom was at the sink, and before I'd even sat down, she said, without turning around, I saw the chat. I told her I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just couldn't keep doing this. And this one was bigger than she knew, and I needed her in my corner. She dried her hands very slowly. You've always been the strong one, Dana, she said. And I braced, because in my family, the strong one is never a compliment. It's an assignment. You have more than your sister. You always have. Would it kill you to smooth it over? Just this once? Just this once. Even Mom. Even the peacemaker had a checkbook where her spine should have been, and I understood in that kitchen that peace, in this family, has only ever meant Dana pays. She wasn't cruel about it. She looked tired and a little scared, and she believed she was asking me to be generous. But she was asking me to hand over the down payment on my whole future so she wouldn't have to sit in a room where her daughters disagreed about money. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. And I drove home understanding that whatever I did next, I was going to do it alone. Mia was sitting on the porch steps when I came out, waiting for me, which she wouldn't have done if she just wanted a ride somewhere. She's 15 and 11/12, all elbows and eyeliner and a watchfulness that reminds me painfully of myself at that age. I sat down next to her on the cold concrete. For a while neither of us said anything. Then she said, not looking at me, "You don't have to pay for it, Aunt Dana." I asked her what she meant. She picked at the hem of her sleeve. The party. I know it's a lot. I heard Mom on the phone. She told me she didn't even want the ballroom. She wanted a bunch of her friends and a backyard and the string lights. Maybe. But not the 400-person guest list her mother had built out of aunts and cousins and Mom's coworkers, none of whom Mia had ever met. It's not really for me, she said, and she said it flatly. The way you say a thing you've known for a while and finally stopped hoping wasn't true. My niece had figured out at 15 what it took me 34 years and a folder full of receipts to name. The party wasn't about her birthday. It was about my sister needing to prove, to a family that measures love in money, that she loved her daughter the most. And Mia was going to be the excuse for a bill she never asked for. I put my arm around her and she let me, which she almost never does anymore. And sitting on those cold steps, I made a different decision than the one I'd driven out with. I wasn't going to protect the party. I was going to protect the kid. And those, I was starting to understand, were two very different things. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did the thing I'd been avoiding for 10 years. I took the folder off the shelf. If your phone only ever lights up when someone needs a check, you already know exactly what this feeling is. That particular dread of finally adding up a thing you've spent years making sure you never had to look at. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one who always pays? And then, stay with me, because subscribing is how you find out what the total turned out to be. The folder was thick. Bank statements, screenshots, a few handwritten I owe us from years back when Tammy still bothered to pretend. I made coffee at midnight like a much younger woman, and I opened a fresh spreadsheet because a folder is a feeling but a spreadsheet is a fact, and I was done having feelings about this. Column A, the date. Column B, what it was for. Column C, the amount. Column D, paid back. And column D was going to be very lonely. I started at the transmission, February 8 years back, $900, and I worked forward, one line at a time, refusing to let myself round, refusing to let myself soften a single figure. The security deposit. The phone bills, plural. The credit card check I'd written the summer Mia broke her arm. The loan for the car that became a different car. The venue hold in October. Line after line after line, each one small, each one wrapped in the same urgent kindness, each one closing my folder a little tighter. Around 1 in the morning, I stopped typing and just looked at the running total in the corner of the screen, and for a long moment I could not make my hand move to scroll down and see the rest. The number, when I finally let myself see all of it, was $41,000. 41,360. Over 10 years and change, not $1 of it in column D. I sat in the blue light of the screen and I did not cry, because crying was a feeling and I'd retired those for the night. I just looked at it. $41,000 is a used car paid in cash. It's 2 years of a kid's college. It's most of a down payment on a 2-bedroom with a leak under the sink. I had given my family a house I would never live in, one $900 emergency at a time, and I had done it so quietly that they had genuinely come to believe the money simply appeared. The way rain appears, the way I appeared whenever they called. And here is what the ledger taught me that no amount of feeling ever had. I had not been helping them. Helping has an end. Helping makes someone stronger and then steps back. What I'd been doing had no end built into it, because I'd never wanted it to end. An ending would have meant finding out who I was to these people when I wasn't paying. I'd been funding a way of life and calling it love, and they'd been accepting it and calling it the same thing, and the word had covered for both of us for a decade. Love that keeps a balance isn't love, but love that never checks the balance isn't safe. I finally understood the whole sentence, standing in my kitchen at 1 in the morning, looking at the safest number I'd ever been afraid of. And I knew, the way you know a diagnosis is right even before the doctor finishes the word, that the question was no longer whether I could keep paying. The question was, what I was going to do with $41,000 worth of proof. There was one more thing the spreadsheet showed me, and it was the thing that changed everything from a grief into a plan. As I'd rebuilt the last year line by line, I'd had to pull up the actual contracts to get the amounts right. And that's when I saw whose name was on them. The venue hold, 1500, was on my card, in my name, under a confirmation number that ended in my initials because I'd read it out myself. But it wasn't only the venue. The cake. Tammy had put a deposit down at a bakery in October, and when the first card declined, she'd texted me in a panic and I'd given her mine, just for the hold. $300? My card. And the dress? The $400 dress in the fitting room photo was on a layaway plan at a boutique. And the plan was in my name too, because of course it was. Because, you have better credit, Dana. They'll approve you. I sat back in my chair. For 10 years I had felt like the family's wallet, passive, opened on demand, a thing that money went out of. But a wallet has no power. A signatory does. And somewhere in the fog of a decade of favors, I had become the person legally attached to the very party I was being ordered to fund. The holds were mine to place. Which meant, I realized slowly, with the cold, clean feeling of a column finally balancing, that the holds were also mine to release. I hadn't just been paying for their choices. I'd been standing between them and the consequences of their choices, my name the only thing holding the whole delusion together. And a name you gave without meaning to is a name you can take back. Before I did anything drastic, I tried the reasonable thing, because I need you to know I gave them a door before I ever touched a lock. The next day, I sent Tammy a real message, a calm one, the kind I'd have sent a client whose numbers didn't add up. I told her I loved her and I loved Mia, and I wanted Mia to have a good 16th. And then I offered something I thought was more than fair. Let's sit down together, I said, the two of us, and build an actual budget. Something Mia would love that we could both afford. I'll contribute a set amount, a real, named number, out in the open. And we plan the rest around it, honestly, on paper. No more surprise deposits, no more holds that turn into whole parties. Just two sisters and a spreadsheet, deciding together. I read it over twice before I sent it, and I remember feeling almost hopeful because it was the most honest thing I'd said to my sister in years. It wasn't a no, it was a different kind of yes. The kind with edges, the kind that could actually hold weight. I offered to be generous on purpose instead of by ambush. I thought, maybe if she could just see that I wasn't refusing her, only refusing the fog, we could build something real out of this mess. I hit send. And then I did what I always do after I put my whole chest into something. I waited, and I told myself not to expect the worst. Because for one more night, I still believed the problem was that they didn't understand me. It hadn't occurred to me yet that they understood me perfectly, and that a budget, to my family, wasn't a solution. It was an insult. Tammy called me instead of texting, which she only does when she wants me to hear her voice break, and her voice broke right on schedule. So that's it, she said. I'm a line item now, your own sister. I told her that wasn't what I'd said. I'd said the opposite. I'd said, let's plan it together. Together, she repeated, like the word tasted bad. You want a meeting. You want me to justify my daughter's birthday to you like I'm applying for a loan. And there it was. The whole difference between us laid bare on a phone line. To me, a budget was respect. It meant I took her seriously enough to plan with her. To her, a budget was an accusation, proof that I saw the family the way I saw my clients, as columns to be balanced instead of people to be loved. Real families don't do this, she said, and she was crying now. Actually crying, not the performed kind. Real families don't count. I didn't argue. There wasn't anything to argue. She meant it. All the way down. She had been raised, same as me, in a house where counting was the coldest thing a person could do, and where the highest form of love was to give until it hurt, and never, ever look at the bill. I had spent 10 years being the exception that proved her rule, the one who gave and never counted. And now I'd picked up a pencil. And to her, that pencil was a betrayal bigger than any amount of money. She hung up before I could answer. and I sat there realizing that the reasonable door I'd opened had just closed, from her side, and that there was no version of this where I stayed the good sister. There was only the version where I stayed the family's wallet, or the version where I finally stopped. Then the vendors started calling me, and that's when the trap fully closed, because it turned out the fog had a deadline. The venue emailed first, a friendly professional note reminding Ms. Cisco that the balance of the ballroom rental was due in full within 72 hours to secure the date, and that the card on file would be charged automatically if payment wasn't arranged. The card on file. My card. Then the bakery texted about the cake balance. Then the boutique about the final layaway installment on the dress. Every single one of them was addressed to me because every single one of them was my account, and none of them knew or cared that the party they were billing me for was a fight I was losing with my own family. I know some of you are shouting at your screen right now. Don't pay it. Hang up. Block them all. Stay with me, because it's not that simple. And what my father said next is the whole reason I finally stopped. If I did nothing, the charges would hit my card in 3 days, straight into the credit line I needed clean for my closing, and the party I never agreed to would become real on my dime, whether I liked it or not. That was the genius of how these things get built, though nobody builds them on purpose. By the time I understood the shape of the trap, I was already standing inside it, holding the only key. I could pay, and lose the condo, and buy myself another decade of being the wallet. Or I could use the one power a signatory has that a wallet never will. My phone buzzed in my hand while I was still staring at the venue's email. The screen said, "Dad." And I knew, before I even answered, that he was calling to close the door I'd just found. My father does not raise his voice, and that's what makes him effective, because a man who never yells makes you feel like you're the one being unreasonable simply for having a pulse. "Dana," he said, warm, tired, the voice he uses to end things. "This has gone far enough." He didn't ask my side. He didn't mention the budget I'd offered, which meant Tammy had told him her version and he'd accepted it whole, the way he always accepts her version, because her version never asks anything of him except money, and money, he understands. He explained the family to me like I was a child who'd forgotten the rules. I was the oldest. I had the good job. This was what the strong ones did. They carried. They smoothed. They made the birthday happen. "Your sister struggles," he said. "You don't. That's not her fault and it's not yours. But it means something. Being the one who can." I stayed quiet. I've learned that silence makes people say the truest version of what they came to say. And after a moment, into that silence, my father said the thing I will hear for the rest of my life. His voice didn't even harden. "That's the part I can't forget." He said it gently, like it was obvious, like it was love. "Pay up, Dana, or you're no longer family. Pay up, or you're no longer family." There it was, finally, out loud. The price of my membership, itemized at last by the man who'd taught me the currency. Not, "will be hurt." Not, "will be disappointed." Gone. Cast out. The whole thing I'd been paying $41,000 over 10 years to avoid, named as the penalty for stopping. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I said, "Okay, Dad," in a voice so steady it surprised us both. And I hung up, and I set the phone on the table, and I sat with the cleanest feeling I'd had in years, because he'd just told me exactly what my money had been buying, and now I knew the price, and I'd finally decided it was too high. After a sentence like that, most people fall apart, and I want to tell you I did, because it would make me more relatable. But I didn't. I did the thing I do at work when a number comes in that changes the whole audit. I got very, very calm. It's a strange gift, the auditor's calm. When everything is loud, I get quiet and I separate the feeling from the figure, and I look at what's actually true underneath the noise. So I sat at my table and I did that. Feeling, my father just threatened to erase me. Figure, I had a decision to make in 3 days, and I was the only one who could make it. I let the feeling sit in one chair and I pulled the figure into the other, and I looked straight at it. If I paid the $7,200, here's what I would actually be buying. Not a party. Not Mia's happiness. Mia had told me herself she didn't want it. I'd be buying another decade of exactly this. Another 10 years of favors that never got a column D, another folder that never got opened, another late-night spreadsheet somewhere down the line with a number even bigger and lonelier than $41,000. My father hadn't threatened me. He'd made me an offer, and he'd made the terms unusually clear. Keep paying. Stay family. And for the first time in my life, I let myself finish the thought he'd started. What kind of family charges admission? What kind of membership can only be renewed in cash? I'd spent 34 years so afraid of being cast out that I'd never once asked what I was actually inside of. And sitting there, calm as a balanced book, I finally asked it, and I did not like the answer. But calm is not the same as brave, and I need to be honest about the wall I hit next, because it's the real one, the one under all the money. Once I let myself imagine actually stopping, not paying, not smoothing, not fixing, a question came up from somewhere very old and very deep, and it wasn't about the condo at all. It was, who am I to them if I don't pay? For 10 years, being the one who covered things had been my whole location in the family. It was how I knew where I stood at holidays, why I got the seat at the head of the table, what made my mother call me the strong one, and my father trust me with the truth about his pension. Take away the paying, and I honestly did not know what was left. Would they still call? Would there still be a chair? Or was I, underneath all my competence, just afraid of the same thing Tammy was afraid of being unloved, and had simply chosen a more respectable way to buy my way out of it? That was the hardest thing I saw that week. Harder than $41,000, harder than my father's sentence. I saw that my silent generosity hadn't been the opposite of Tammy's neediness. It had been the same wound wearing a nicer coat. She got love by taking. I got it by giving. Neither one of us had ever once believed we could just be loved, plainly, for nothing, without a transaction attached. And the only way I was ever going to find out whether these people wanted me, and not just my money, was to take the money off the table and see who was still standing there. It was the most terrifying audit I'd ever run, and the only account being examined was me. So I went back to the one place I actually trust, which is the fine print, and I read every contract line by line the way I should have read them the day I signed. The venue agreement was clear, the holding deposit secured the date, and the balance was due 72 hours before the event or upon written demand, whichever came first. And the vendor could cancel with forfeiture of the deposit if the balance wasn't paid. In plain English, I could still cancel. The date was held by my card, which meant the reservation lived or died by my authorization, and if I called before that balance posted, I could release it. I'd lose the $1,500 deposit I'd already sunk in October. That money was gone either way. But I would stop the rest of the venue balance from ever leaving my account. The cake was the same. Deposit forfeited, balance cancelable. The dress layaway I could simply stop, forfeiting what I'd put down and owing nothing more. Add it all up, and the holds in my name came to right around the $7,200 my sister had ordered me to wire. I'd just be the one deciding it stayed in my account instead of hers. There was one catch, and it's the reason I couldn't just sleep on it like a sensible person. The venue's 72-hour clock was already running, and their email said the balance would auto-charge the card on file when it expired. If I waited even one more day to think about it, the decision would be made for me by a billing system that didn't care about my family at all. This was the part outside my control, not whether I could act, but how little time I had to. I could stop this, but only tonight. Not tomorrow, not after one more conversation, not after one more attempt to be understood. Tonight, or the party became mine forever. I set the contract down. I looked at the clock. It was almost 11, and I picked up the phone. Before I dialed, I made myself sit with the real cost, because I'm not reckless, and this was going to cost me something no spreadsheet could show. It wasn't the deposit. I'd already made peace with losing that. It was this. The moment I canceled these holds, the secret was over. Everyone would find out that the venue, the cake, the dress had all been on my card the whole time. That quiet, invisible, martyr Dana had been the one bankrolling it from behind the curtain. The mask would come off. Not the mask of the villain, the mask of the saint. For 10 years I'd hidden how much I paid, and I'd told myself I hid it out of humility, but that wasn't the whole truth. I hid it because being the secret benefactor let me feel superior and safe at the same time. I got to be needed without ever being seen, generous without ever being vulnerable. Canceling meant stepping out from behind that. It meant standing in the kitchen tomorrow and letting them look at me, not as the mysterious source of money, but as a person with limits, a person who could be hurt, a person who had been quietly bleeding out for a decade and was finally, visibly, saying enough. That was the price. Not $1,500. Being seen. And I understood, holding the phone, that this was the exact thing I'd spent my whole life paying to avoid. That the folder had stayed closed all those years for the same reason, because an open folder is a visible one, and a visible woman can be judged. But she can also, finally, be known. I'd never once let anyone in my family know me. I'd only ever let them use me. And it was time, at last, to find out which one they'd actually wanted. At 11:04 on a Tuesday night, I called the venue's after-hours line, and a bored young man named Kevin answered. And I want you to know that the biggest turning point of my life happened in a conversation with a Kevin who was clearly eating something. I gave him the confirmation number. I gave him my name, the name on the card, the name on the hold. And then I said the sentence I'd been walking toward for 10 years and $41,000. I need to cancel it all. He asked if I was sure. I said I was. He read me the terms. The deposit was non-refundable. The reservation would be released immediately. The date would go back on the open calendar. I said I understood. I authorized it. He typed for a moment, and then he said, "Okay, ma'am, that's canceled. You'll get a confirmation email." And he went back to his sandwich. And just like that, the ballroom was gone. I called the bakery's line and left a message canceling the cake. I logged into the boutique account and stopped the layaway. 3 actions, maybe 11 minutes total, and a decade of a certain version of me ended in the time it takes to microwave dinner. I set the phone down on the table. My hand was shaking, which surprised me, because inside I felt strangely, enormously still. The stillness of a thing that has finally stopped being carried. I had just lit a fire I couldn't put out, in a family that would call it arson. By morning, they would all know there was no more smoothing this, no more fixing, no more quiet. The folder was open now, and it was open in front of everyone. And for the first time in my adult life, I had no urge whatsoever to close it. I did one more thing before I let myself sleep, and it was the calmest, coldest, kindest thing I've ever typed. I opened the family group chat, the same one where the cake had arrived 2 days before, and I wrote them a single, level message. I told them that the holds I had placed, the venue, the cake, the dress, I had canceled tonight because they were in my name and I could no longer keep them there. I told them I loved Mia and I was not going to explain myself over text. And I said I'd be at Dad and Mom's house at 7 the next morning, and if they wanted to talk to me about any of it, that's where I would be. Then I printed the spreadsheet. All of it. Every line. 10 years. $41,360. Column D as empty as the day I'd built it. I put the pages in a plain manila folder. The same folder, actually, that I'd finally emptied. And I set it by my keys so I wouldn't forget it in the morning, though there was no chance I'd forget it. I wasn't bringing it to shame anyone. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I was bringing it because I was done being the only person in the family who knew the truth. For a decade, I'd protected them from a number. Tomorrow, I was going to set that number on their kitchen table and let it be as true for them as it had always been for me. I turned off the light. I did not sleep much. And somewhere out in Millridge, a venue's automated system was already sending a cancellation notice that would land in my sister's inbox at exactly the wrong or exactly the right time. By 7:30 the next morning, they would all know. I got to my parents' house at 6:50 because I have never once been late to anything, and I sat in the driveway drinking gas station coffee and watching the kitchen light come on. Tammy's car was already there. Of course it was. She'd have driven over the second she got my message, to strategize with Dad, to get ahead of me the way she always does. I gave myself one more minute in the car. Then I picked up the folder and I walked in, and I had barely gotten the door closed behind me when Tammy's phone lit up on the kitchen table, screen up, and I watched all of us read it at the same time. An email. Subject line: "Your reservation has been canceled." The timestamp said 7:28. Tammy grabbed the phone. Her face did something I'd never seen it do, a whole weather system of confusion and dawning horror crossing it in about 2 seconds. "What is this?" she said, not really a question. "The venue canceled. It says the reservation's been released." She looked up at me, and Dad looked up from his coffee, and Mom froze at the counter with a dish towel in her hands, and for one long, suspended moment, the whole kitchen held still while the truth arrived on a 7:30 timestamp exactly the way I'd known it would.